Episode S, Joseph Smith's Secret Handshakes, The Freemason Connection, Part 3. I struggled to condense the immense influence of Freemasonry within Mormonism into just 2 videos, and in the process, I had to leave out critical details that are essential for truly understanding the Nauvoo period and how Freemasonry shaped the future of the church. To do this topic justice, I'll be releasing 2 more videos. One focused on the pivotal moments during Joseph Smith's life that I couldn't fully address, and another that will track the influence of Freemasonry from Brigham Young's era all the way to today, as ongoing changes in the temple continue to reflect its impact. Part 1, LDS Twisted Facts. Several years ago, I came across the Church History Topics section on the LDS website and found their take on Joseph Smith and Freemasonry. By this point, I was well versed in the subject and curious to see how the church framed it. Here's what I found. In December 1841, 18 Latter-day Saint Masons organized a lodge in Nauvoo. Joseph Smith and 40 others applied for membership the following day. On March 15, 1842, Illinois Grand Master Mason Abraham Jonas granted a dispensation for the organization of the Nauvoo Lodge, installed its officers, and initiated Joseph and Sidney Rigdon to the degree of entered apprentice in the upper floor space above Joseph's red brick store. The next day, Jonas passed Joseph and Sidney as fellow craft and raised them as master masons. Historical sources do not explain Joseph Smith's motives for joining the Freemasons. In many localities in early America, the most important elected officials were also Masons. In joining, Joseph may have assumed he would gain a network of allies who could give him access to political influence and protection against persecution. After being betrayed by some of his closest associates in Missouri, Joseph may have found Masonry's emphasis on confidentiality and loyalty appealing. Latter-day Saint Masons also likely encouraged Joseph to apply for membership. In any event, Joseph, like all Masons, would have avowed that his purpose for joining was strictly to gain knowledge and be of service to others. This is the LDS Church's sanitized version of events. Notice how they conveniently omit key details. Hiram Smith was actually the worshipful master of the lodge-to-be. John C. Bennett served as secretary, and Whitney as treasurer. All 3 were seasoned Masons, with Hiram having joined as far back as the mid to late 1820s. Now, take a close look at the church's narrative. At first, they imply that Joseph may have joined the Masons for political influence and protection, a very pragmatic, self-serving reason. But then, they quickly pivot to suggest that his true motivation was the noble pursuit of knowledge. These are 2 completely different motives, and the first one, gaining influence and protection, seems far more likely given Joseph's circumstances. In fact, as I covered in the previous video, Joseph used Masonic signs to escape prison. That's right, he didn't just get released, he broke out. There's no sugarcoating that reality. Once again, we're left with more questions than answers, and it's becoming harder to believe that these inconsistencies were ever divinely guided. The church's attempt to downplay Joseph's real motivations is a clear example of whitewashing history. It's not just about gaining knowledge, it's about survival, power, and manipulation. Freemasonry was a power play move for Joseph. Now let's see what really happened in Nauvoo, outside the sanitized version. Part 2, a deeper dive into a suspended dispensation. In the first video, we briefly touched on the formation of the Nauvoo Lodge and the issues it faced, like losing its dispensation. But we only scratched the surface. Now let's dig deeper into the truth. Bodley Lodge No. 1 in Quincy, IL, raised serious concerns about the legitimacy of the special dispensation granted to the Nauvoo Lodge, UD. On August 11, 1842, Grand Master Abraham Jonas responded by suspending the dispensation, citing irregularities, until the annual communication of the Illinois Grand Lodge. In a short span of time, the Nauvoo Lodge initiated 286 candidates, with nearly as many being raised. John C. Bennett even reported a single instance where 63 individuals were elected on one ballot. Despite the suspension being lifted later, numerous violations in Masonic protocol persisted. These included mass balloting, voting on multiple candidates at once, and allowing initiates to progress through degrees far too quickly. In some cases, new Masons advanced from entered apprentice to master Mason within just 2 days, bypassing the required proficiency for each degree. These irregular practices revealed how far the Nauvoo Lodge deviated from established Masonic standards, highlighting its controversial role in early Mormonism. LDS apologists and historians often claim that the Nauvoo Lodge lost its dispensation or charter because it grew too large. However, that's simply not the case. In Freemasonry, membership isn't automatic. You had to be endorsed, vetted, and voted in by existing members. But in Nauvoo, these rules were blatantly ignored. Men were admitted into the craft without going through the proper channels. Even worse, many of these new members failed to meet the essential requirements for advancement, yet were pushed through the degrees anyway, a clear and direct violation of Masonic principles. When the Nauvoo Lodge's dispensation was suspended, they arrogantly continued operating as though nothing had changed, initiating even more members during the suspension. Once reinstated, those individuals were deemed illegitimate, and they were required to restart the process from scratch. However, there are no records indicating that these initiations were ever redone that I have been able to find, only that they were outright rejected. This flagrant disregard for Masonic protocol exposed the Nauvoo Lodge's deep-rooted misconduct, calling into question the legitimacy of their entire operation. At its peak, the Mormon lodges boasted 1,492 members across 5 lodges, while all other lodges in Illinois combined had only 414 Masons. This imbalance raised serious concerns, culminating in a decisive action by the Grand Lodge of Illinois on October 3, 1843. The Grand Lodge passed a resolution that revoked the charter of the Rising Sun Lodge and refused to grant charters for the remaining LDS lodges, citing numerous serious violations of Masonic rules. Rising Sun Lodge number 12, 1. Failed to pay dues to the Grand Lodge. 2. Conducted Masonic work improperly. Nauvoo Lodge UDU 1. Operated irregularly. 2. Failed to submit its records to the Grand Lodge for review. 3. Admitted men without vetting their character. 4. Advanced candidates through degrees without requiring proficiency. Helm Lodge UD 1. Acted irregularly by processing 4 petitions in a single day. 2. Advanced candidates from the 1st to 3rd degrees within 2 days. 3. Failed to present records for inspection. 4. Only partially paid its dues. 1. Mirrored Helm Lodge's violations. 2. Initiated candidates the same day petitions were received, bypassing investigations and proper election procedures. Keokuk Lodge 1. Processed petitions and acted on them within a month, violating standard waiting periods. These lodges flagrantly ignored Masonic traditions and protocols, operating outside the established norms. The Grand Lodge's decision to revoke their standing was a direct result of these brazen violations, underscoring the chaos and irregularity rampant within the LDS lodges. The resolution wasn't just about dues. It was about preserving the integrity of the craft itself. What were these violations of Masonic laws? Partly it was the introduction of their rites into Mormonism itself. Part 3, the Temple, the Masons, and Deceit. As I pointed out in the first 2 videos, the original temples weren't used for endowment ceremonies as members today would recognize, except for baptisms for the dead. Instead, they primarily served as places of learning, and in the case of Kirtland, even food storage. But everything changed once Joseph Smith became a Master Mason. Suddenly, the sacred handshakes of Freemasonry found their way into Joseph's so-called divine temple endowment, a ceremony he claimed was revealed to him by God. One of the most important of these signs is a handshake meant to represent brotherly love, relief, and truth. And yet Joseph betrayed that truth by appropriating it into his own agenda. These Masonic handshakes, referred to as signs and tokens, are still used in LDS temple rituals today. However, what is no longer part of the ceremony, since its removal in 1990, is the infamous death oath. Yes, a death oath. Freemasons took a symbolic oath rooted in the legend of Hiram Abiff, their supposed founder. According to Masonic lore, if a Mason broke their oaths, they would face brutal consequences, having their throats slit and their belly cut open from side to side. Hiram Abiff, legend says, was murdered by 3 men trying to uncover Masonic secrets, but he chose death rather than betrayal. And this very oath was part of the LDS temple ceremony for decades until it was conveniently removed in 1990. The LDS apologetics group FAIR tries to rationalize this, citing Mike Norton's blog post, though they curiously don't provide a link to it. According to them, The ritual is changed to meet the needs of members and to better communicate the endowment to them. Remember, there is a difference between the endowment ritual and the endowment itself. The ritual is not the endowment, but how the endowment is taught, just as the Catholic Mass is not Holy Communion, but how Holy Communion is given to the congregation. So which is it? Are we offending the endowment, or is the endowment offending us? If this ceremony was originally revealed by God to Joseph Smith as a correction of ages of corruption, then why do church leaders feel the need to change it over the generations? The removal of the death oath is just one of several alterations since Smith's death. If it was truly of divine origin, why alter it at all? Fair provides an answer to the removal of Masonic elements from the temple ceremony, but it falls flat and fails to address the core issue. They claim, when Joseph was first trying to communicate the truths of the endowment, he used a ritual form familiar to the saints of his day. That ritual form was, in some respects, Masonic in nature. As the saints lost their connection to Masonry, the symbolic meaning of the penalties and other Masonic elements was lost as well. They became meaningless to all but a few Latter-day Saint Freemasons. So the penalties were removed along with other elements, both Masonic and non-Masonic, which no longer served the purpose of communicating the truths of the endowment. This explanation crumbles under scrutiny. As we established earlier and in the previous videos, Masonic membership in the church was virtually non-existent before December 1841. It wasn't until after Joseph and Sidney became Master Masons that a mass recruitment drive began, one that fast-tracked the majority of initiates, skipping the proper training and time it typically takes to become a Master Mason. Normally this process takes months or even years, but in Nauvoo, men were being raised within just 3 days. These recruits didn't have the chance to learn or understand the deeper Masonic rites and traditions, let alone lose any connection to them later. This was also one of the reasons the Nauvoo Lodge lost its charter. The irregularities in their Masonic practices were blatant violations of Freemasonry, not just a loss of understanding. Fair's defense hinges on the assumption that members are unaware of the church's true history, allowing them to present a sanitized version without fear of contradiction. They count on members not knowing enough about the past to question the narrative, much less make an informed decision about what really happened. This is undeniable. Even LDS historian Richard Bushman stated in December of 2013, Joseph Smith was very eclectic. He drew upon ideas from all over, including Masonic ritual. One of the things brought into the church that was taken directly from the Freemasons was the Masonic apron. We heard about the garments and markings a prior video, but I did not mention the apron. Part 4, Corruption of Masonry, Ignorance to History. In previous videos, we touched briefly on Joseph Smith Jr. and other church leaders' claims that Freemasonry had been corrupted. However, we barely scratched the surface in Part 1 and left out critical points in Part 2. So in Part 3, let's dive into this further. Consider this quote from President Heber C. Kimball, a Mason himself and a member of the First Presidency for 21 years. We have the true Masonry. The Masonry of today is received from the apostasy which took place in the days of Solomon and David. They have now and then a thing that is correct, but we have the real thing. Stanley B. Kimball, Heber C. Kimball and family, the Nauvoo years, p. 458. Now, compare that to Fair LDS's feeble response. This was a common 19th century belief of both Mormons and Masons, that Masonry had its origins in the Temple of Solomon. A few Masons cling to this view even today. Heber C. Kimball was simply reflecting what many of his contemporaries thought. An opinion not, it turns out, supported by the historical evidence, but it was only an opinion. Fair's dismissal here is astonishingly weak. Prophets of God should be expected to have divine insight, not to simply parrot popular but misguided opinions of their time. If Joseph Smith was truly receiving revelations, why didn't his God correct these erroneous beliefs about Freemasonry? How could a prophet, allegedly shown the true version of Masonry by divine revelation, be so wrong about its history? This isn't just a slip of opinion. It exposes Joseph Smith as someone playing the part of a prophet, exploiting his followers' trust, and passing off human error as divine truth. Fair's response relies on glossing over this glaring inconsistency. They lean on the argument that Kimball's belief was a product of his era, but that's a weak excuse for someone supposedly acting as God's mouthpiece. Once again, Joseph Smith's claim that Freemasonry had been corrupted falls apart under scrutiny, and we see him not as a divinely guided prophet, but as a man weaving convenient myths to manipulate those who believed in his supposed revelations. Part 5, digging a bit deeper into the death of the Smith boys. In the dramatic final moments at Carthage jail, Joseph Smith's raised arms and desperate cry, "O Lord my God," might have been a Masonic signal rather than a mere plea for divine help, as previously discussed. While there is no concrete evidence directly linking Masons to the attack, it is notable that 3 men indicted for conspiring against Smith were later initiated into Freemasonry. The subsequent investigation into the Warsaw Lodge, implicated in the conspiracy and its eventual dissolution, underscores the profound clash between Masonic commitments and local political machinations. By April 1845, under Brigham Young's directive, Masonic activities in Nauvoo were suspended, signaling a dramatic shift in the lodge's influence over the LDS community. In conclusion, the intertwining of Freemasonry and early Mormon practices reveals a complex web of influence and adaptation. Joseph Smith's appropriation of Masonic elements into LDS rituals raises questions about the origins and evolution of sacred rites. As we peel back the layers of history, it becomes evident that these connections challenge the traditional narrative and highlight the broader interplay of secrecy, power, and tradition within the Church. Thank you so kindly for watching. This is the Ex-Mormon Informant signing off for today.